In 2008, the angry video game nerd and the nostalgia critic launched a feud that would define an entire generation of 12-year-olds, including myself. Part of the initial confrontation was a challenge between them. The nostalgia critic had to do what the nerd did, review a terrible nostalgic game. The AVGN had to do what the critic did, review a terrible nostalgic movie. The critic chose the SNES game Bebe's Kids. His review featured Kyle Justin singing a parody of the AVGN theme, and the critic even dressed the part. The video was okay, I guess. I liked when the critic overanalyzed a set of rules displayed in the game, consisting of only no Beavis and no vibes. But he also employed some manipulative editing. He freaks out at running down the game's time limit, but you can see him exploring with a bunch of time until it suddenly cuts to nothing. Now that's not really being honest. All in all, this review is not particularly noteworthy on its own. Now onto the nerd. He had already reviewed a nostalgic movie at this point, ripping Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 to shreds. I guess both he and the critic had to ignore that fact to make this whole bit work though. So he had to pick a new movie. What he chose was a film called Ricky 1. The nerd described it as the only feature-length Rocky spoof that he knew of. The AVGN, of course, was such a big Rocky fan that he had the first 5 movies playing throughout his apartment when Rocky Balboa came out. Anyway, he went on to say it was so obscure that the only reason he knew about it was because he saw it at a video store when he was a kid. He didn't rent it, but years later he got curious and hunted down one copy on eBay. Ricky 1, as he described it, was a completely insane film with things blowing up for no reason, a guy trying to sell porn over the phone, male prostitution, male stripping, a guy selling exploding doormats to keep burglars out, absurd jokes, lame puns, and a plot that doesn't even resemble Rocky. One big point of contention was Ricky's catchphrase, "Don't be negative."
Hey, come on, don't be negative.
Rocky never says anything like that, the closest thing being absolutely.
Absolutely.
Now, Ricky was portrayed by a man named Michael Michaud. I can only imagine this was psychological warfare on the AVGN's part. As we all know, a Mike Michaud is the owner of Channel Awesome. For sure, this can't be a coincidence. Whereas Bebe's Kids really had nothing to do with Cinemassacre. I think we all know who had the better entry to this challenge. To me, this review is one of the funniest videos that the nerd ever put out. It's up there with Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. As a result, I formed sort of a weird obsession with the film. Actually, I have a weird obsession with several bad movies that no one should ever care about. But the point is, as a kid, I would go around saying "don't be negative" to literally everyone. This review made me want to watch the actual movie. The nerd made it out to be some sort of insane disaster piece. I'm all about that kind of thing. The good news was, it was free right on YouTube. But the problem was, I'm sort of a videophile. I want the best quality possible for my movie watching experience. The YouTube upload was in 240p and it seemed to be a pretty bad rip. It was also the PAL version, retitled as Heart to Win. This meant it ran at 25 FPS instead of 24. Personally, I like watching movies at the right speed. But hey, there is another upload. This one is at least 480p. But I think it somehow might be an even worse rip. And it's still the PAL release. Okay, luckily they sell the movie on Amazon for pretty cheap. It's a DVD as well. Unfortunately, according to the reviews, this DVD is actually a bootleg transfer of the VHS version. Who the hell would want to bootleg Ricky 1? Well, I got it anyway. And once again, it's the PAL edition. I'll give the bootleggers credit though, this is the best version I've seen thus far. But to paraphrase Shania Twain, it don't impress me much. It was becoming clear that the only way I'd be satisfied in watching this movie would be to track down the original NTSC VHS tape. In doing so, I could rip the movie myself in higher quality. So much like the nerd, when I went searching for a copy of the movie, there was exactly one result on eBay. Well, that is if you don't count Ricky's first reconciliation. But the good thing was that it was sealed in the box. It was as new of a tape as it could be. That was good for my preservation purposes, since it wouldn't be worn out or anything. But the seller wanted $500 for it. Who the actual hell would spend $500 on Ricky 1? Even I'm not that crazy. I mean, I know it's rare. Considering most of the rips are of the PAL version, I guess the NTSC release practically doesn't exist. The nerd wasn't kidding when he said the movie was obscure. Anyway, I managed to haggle the price down to $150. Still, that's way too much for this movie, but I can live with it a bit more. So here it is, sealed and unopened. But am I really going to destroy the collector's value by unwrapping it? Of course I am. I'm this movie's sole collector, so what do I care? Also, I'd rather be able to watch the movie I just spent over $100 on. So, now that I had the tape, how exactly does one go about digitizing it? Well, conventionally speaking, there's the right way and the cheap way. Although nowadays there is a right and cheap way. Let's go over all of them. Let's start with the conventionally right way first. I got into VHS preservation about a decade ago in order to save my family's old home movies. This is what was recommended back then. First, you need an SVHS VCR. SVHS is a slightly better version of VHS that never really caught on. However, an SVHS VCR can play normal tapes, and output an S-video for superior visual quality. What I have here is a JVC HRS7800U. This unit has what is called a time-based corrector, or TBC for short. Now, what a TBC does is basically stabilize the picture. You know how VHS video can look very warped at times? A TBC fixes that. Unfortunately, a fancy unit such as this one goes for about $400 these days. It doesn't end there though. This VCR just has a line TBC. You can invest in a separate full-frame TBC for a couple $1,000s. What does that do? Well, it keeps the output steady, which is to say it'll prevent any dropped frames. Of course, now we need a high-quality analog capture card. Preferably, it should be an ATI All-in-Wonder. You will of course need to build a Windows XP machine to use it. So let's estimate that you're going to spend about $2,500 if you use this method. Is this reasonable for most people? No, of course not. So that leads us to the cheap and completely wrong method. A lot of people on the internet will tell you to do this, but it's just terrible. I don't want to name any names, but let me show you an example of advice I've unironically seen. Okay, so screw spending thousands of dollars on good equipment. Just get an easy cap for $10. Get whatever VCR, doesn't matter. Plug it all in and open OBS. Rescale the output to 1080p. Might as well deinterlace in real time too. Record directly into H.264. Now let's change the container to MP4 as well. So here we go. This is, yeah, this is looking like complete garbage. Okay, so, don't do any of that. Honestly, it makes me cringe to think that people are digitizing their tapes in this way. But really, can you blame them? The barrier of entry to do things the right way is too high. That is, until now, of course. I'm going to tell you about the latest and greatest method of VHS preservation. It's called VHS Decode. Actually, it's a spin-off of another project called LD Decode, which is for laserdiscs. Since both formats use analog video, there's a lot of overlap. Anyway, the good thing about VHS Decode is that it can be done cheaply and give you the best results possible. How can that be? Well, instead of getting all this expensive hardware, what if we just process the tape signal in software instead? That way we could bypass any physical component that is either inadequate or inherently degrades the picture. Instead, we can code a virtual VCR in TBC and output the video in optimal quality, directly from the source. It would be like ripping the video file off a DVD instead of recording it through a capture card. How the actual heck does that work, I hear you say? Well, I'm going to give you a basic overview of this process. But if you're really interested, I recommend reading through the VHS Decode GitHub page. It's far more detailed on how this all actually works. It's a bit technical, but there's also a Discord server, a subreddit, a forum, and a Facebook page where people far more knowledgeable than me can help you out. So let's look at the hardware we need. Obviously, we gotta have a VCR. I've ditched the old JVC. It's been made redundant. Instead, I'll be using a Sony SLV N99. It's nothing special in the conventional sense. But we won't actually be using its native video output for anything final. We just need it to read the raw radio frequency signal contained on the tape. Then we can capture that by tapping into what is called the RF test point. No, not the RF output on the back. That would be too easy. The RF test point is inside the VCR in the PCB somewhere. You see, we can represent the tape signal digitally, similarly to how we represent sound files. It just uses a significantly higher sample rate. But how do we get that signal onto our computer exactly? Well, there's two main pieces of capture hardware that you can choose from. First, there's the Doomsday Duplicator. This thing was designed to preserve laserdiscs. More specifically, it was designed to preserve the 1986 BBC Doomsday Project. That was sort of a time capsule of 1980s Britain, created to celebrate the 900th anniversary of the Doomsday Book. That was a giant, meticulous census/land survey of England commissioned by William the Conqueror. It was called the Doomsday Book because the entries within were said to be as unalterable as the Last Judgment. Also, it's spelled like Domesday because that's how you spelled Doomsday back then. But the 1986 Doomsday Project was a pretty bad time capsule because they mastered it for Laserdisc. Ironically, you can get yourself a modern copy of the millennium-old Doomsday Book just fine. But this Doomsday Project from just a couple decades ago is completely inaccessible for most people. That's where the duplicator comes in. It's a bit pricey if you buy one pre-built, but it, like the VHS and LD decode software, is completely open source. You can build it yourself for much cheaper. I have a Doomsday duplicator. It was designed to preserve British history, but I'm using it for a far more noble purpose, preserving Ricky 1. Now, I did say you could do this cheaply. Well, the other capture device you can use is called a CX card. You can get one off of AliExpress for $20. Technically, the duplicator is slightly better, but you really can't beat that price. I'd recommend this option for most people. Anyway, so usually you'd have to solder to the RF test point, but the nice thing about my Sony VCR is that it's part of a header on the PCB. I can just plug these DuPont connectors to it, and plug the other end into the Doomsday duplicator. I don't even have to drill a hole into the shell or anything. I just run the wires through the little grill in the back. There is zero hardware modding here, which makes it pretty nice. So the Doomsday duplicator is pretty straightforward. It plugs in using USB and the capture program is pretty simple. All you gotta do now is play the movie. While we can watch it while it's being captured, a better idea is to make a conventional recording of the tape at the same time. Why? Well, we need the audio. For those of you who don't know, VHS has two audio formats, hi-fi and linear. Hi-fi sounds much better. It can also be decoded with software called Hi-Fi Decode. You just have to tap into the Hi-Fi test point for that. But there's really less quality to gain from that compared to video. And if your tapes just have linear audio, there's nothing to actually decode. So a conventional capture is really all you can do. That's also what I'm going to do with Ricky 1 here. See, Hi-Fi Decode gives me a lot of buzzing, and I'm not that clever enough to debug that. My capture card is a Hauppauge WinTV HVR1250, and I use Amarok TV as the recording software. No OBS required. So once the movie is finished, we're left with something called an LDS file. I don't know what the Mormons have to do with this though. This represents our raw tape signal. Now, using the VHS decode software, it's time to process it into two time-based corrected TBC files. One is for Luma and one is for Chroma. Anyway, it takes a while to decode. This 90-minute movie took about 15 hours to finish processing. That's definitely downside number one for this method. What, you thought capturing in real time took forever? God, I wish it were that simple. But once it's done, we can just spit out the video file. The result is a 10-bit losslessly compressed MKV file with 422 chroma subsampling. If you don't know what that means, it's just that we have a lot of high-quality video data here. Next, it's time to deinterlace, or in this case, inverse telecine since we're dealing with a movie. If you don't know what that is, basically film is 24 FPS and VHS is 30 FPS. We're just removing the extra frames. I like to use a program called Hybrid. It comes with a lot of video filters. Specifically, I'll be using TIV-TC to reduce the frame rate. But if this were normal interlace video, I use the QT-GMC deinterlacer. I'm also going to crop and resize the video to 640 by 480. Technically, NTSC is 720 by 480, but I like my square pixels. I'm going to output in ProRes. It's a video format that's also 10-bit with 422 chroma subsampling. It's just that video editors like it a bit more. Speaking of which, now that the video is processed, I can further clean it up with Adobe Premiere. The video levels need adjusting, and I'm even going to do some noise reduction. But don't worry though, I won't make it look like wax. I'm not James Cameron. Now for the audio, we're going to need that conventional capture we made earlier. For its video, I'll also inverse telecine it. For the actual sound, I like to clean it up in Isotope RX. I like to remove noise, hum, and pops in the soundtrack. So now I drag the conventional capture and the cleaned up audio into Premiere. They're already in sync with one another. So if I align the conventional and decoded captures, then the audio will be aligned too. Boom, we now have audio sync. Unfortunately, Ricky 1 sounds like absolute trash. Here's the raw audio.
We gotta build up your upper body strength, so lift. Lift, come on.
Now here's the cleaned up audio.
We gotta build up your upper body strength, so lift. Lift, come on.
Yeah, it's not so great. The movie sounds very muffled and lacks any sort of dynamic range. If you want to hear how hi-fi can actually sound, let's use the classic movie Speed as an example.
Pop quiz, hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do?
Yeah, that sounds fine. Good even. Ricky 1 just wasn't mastered too well. Shocking. Anyway, rendering the video gives us the final distributable copy. It's about 2 gigs. This is in comparison to all our intermediate files. You know that LDS file? 257 gigabytes. The 2 TBC files? Another 293 gigabytes. The size of my entire Ricky 1 folder is 684 gigabytes. And this is downside number 2. I hope you have a lot of storage space, especially if you want to keep the LDS file. If there's ever any improvements to the decoding software, you don't need to recapture, you can just reuse that LDS file. But I must say that the results right now are already worth it. As I said, it's a bit technical, and it's certainly a bit more effort than using an EasyCap, but when it comes to VHS, you're gonna have to put in some work to get something good. I am very, very pleased with the quality. I can't state that enough. So now that it's all done, what about the actual movie? After all this time, did Ricky 1 live up to my childhood expectations? Well, to the surprise of no one but me, it sucks. Yes, I'm this movie's biggest fan, and even I don't like it that much. So here's the basic plot. Ricky Wanero is a struggling small-time boxer. His girlfriend Angela is pregnant with their baby. She works at a crisis center, which leads to some real hijinks, believe me. Eventually, she does have the baby, although you never actually see him. I suppose they just couldn't afford a real baby. But come on, even I can show you a newborn. I even acted the role myself. That's how dedicated I am. Anyway, Ricky and Angela met during one of Ricky's stripping sessions. Angela doesn't want Ricky to box anymore, so he gives it up and works at a fish market. Then he becomes a gigolo. Not only that, but all his clients are furries. Apparently. On the flip side, we have the Champ, the Silver Shadow. Speaking of speed, the Champ's actor Hawthorne James played Sam the bus driver in that movie. So I guess Ricky 1 has at least one real actor in it. The Champ is managed by the mob, who he wants to dump. Unfortunately, the mob scares away everyone from fighting him in retaliation. The only opponent the Champ can book is a South American named the Bolivian Bomber. The Bomber is, of course, managed by Hitler, because the Nazis were said to have fled to South America, get it? You'd think Hitler would have aged since the 1940s though. The mob blows up the Bomber, ironically enough. On the topic of the Bolivian Bomber, the bootleg DVD says, "Actually, that's the Champ's name." How did they make a mistake like that? Surely they would have had to watch the movie to even know who the Bomber was. It also gets Ricky's stripper name wrong. It's not the Italian Donkey, it's Super Stud. And he stopped stripping before he even worked at the fish market. Pretty much everything in this description is wrong. As Ricky 1's biggest fan, I find this deplorable. They even get the film's tagline wrong. Does to flying what airplane did to boxing. You'd almost be mistaken, thinking that was intentional. But the VHS copy gets it right. These video pirates clearly don't know what they're doing. Anyway, the Champ reconciles with the mob and then gets set up to fight Ricky. Ricky doesn't want to betray Angela's wishes, but the mob will blow her up if he declines. And so, through the power of positive thinking, he wins. Yes, that's why he's always saying don't be negative. It's part of this high-level joke about achieving the impossible just because you thought positively. This film was written and directed by a man named Bill Nod. His sense of humor is simply out of this world. By that I mean I think he's an alien. It's like, why is Ricky a stripper? Because Sylvester Stallone was in porn before Rocky? Is that the joke? You know, in Rocky 2, Rocky takes some pretty demeaning jobs. I think Bill Nod thought, dang, wouldn't it be funny if he had to resort to prostitution? No, not really. It seems like Bill Nod finds these vaguely absurd ideas hilarious, but they aren't executed very well. The funniest jokes are when they actually parody Rocky. For instance, I'm sure we all remember the scene where Rocky wakes up and drinks raw eggs. Well, Ricky almost does the same thing, but instead spills the eggs out and drinks a Diet Pepsi. Pretty good joke. Then there's that one time that Apollo Creed did a little rhyme.
Be a thinker, not a stinker.
Well, they took that and made it the Champ's entire character.
Well, I am the Champ, and the Champ ain't no slob. That's why I'm dumping Vinny and the mob. I'm gonna promote my own fights and be all the best. And when I'm rich, I'll retire and rest.
Yes, it is a gross exaggeration of a tiny moment of the original, but that's what parody is all about. Then, of course, we have all the rape jokes. Yeah, those are a thing in this movie. On that same note, here's a scene with Ricky's trainer, Leon.
I got raincoat.
What?
I got raincoat.
Huh?
I got raincoat.
Shut up.
When are you gonna visit us in the playground again?
I don't go to playgrounds.
Yes, you do. I'm Captain Raincoat, and I've come to say when you flap my wings, keeps the witches away.
Want to get out of here?
What, he's a pedophile that flashes little girls in the park? What the hell? Why would you put that in your Rocky spoof? But for the most part, it's pretty boring. It's an unfunny comedy, the biggest movie sin of all. It wants to be like Airplane, right? Well, Airplane has a new joke every second. The pace is pretty quick. In Ricky 1, however, scenes just drag on and you wonder what's even supposed to be funny. Take this scene for example. Ricky has consulted a career center for job advice. He has taken a test and is going over the results with Dr. Furskin. That name sounds like foreskin, which I suppose is quite humorous. But the good doctor is unsure what to recommend that Ricky should do. Ricky concludes on his own that he should get a job.
Get a job, right? Yes, as soon as you can. As soon as I can. Yeah. Take a regular job, yeah.
You got all that? For one thing, this scene is shown through one long master shot, so that's exciting. And another thing, I'm not sure what's supposed to be funny. Is it the fact that the doctor had no practical advice, leading Ricky to conclude the most obvious thing possible? I guess there's supposed to be something hysterical here, but once again, mankind just isn't ready for Bill Nodd's advanced sense of humor. So after all my personal effort to preserve the movie, do I recommend it? No. It's a complete snooze fest. It's not at all the insane film that the nerd led me to believe it was. So was all this a waste of time? Well, shouldn't bad media be preserved alongside the good media? For historical purposes at least? With that in mind, I have the movie uploaded on the Internet Archive, where it will hopefully stay safe for future generations to study. I have done the world this service.
He's got the